Welcome. This is BioSci Careers Online Transitions classes. Today's topic is the academic job search, writing CVs, and cover letters. I am Stephanie Eberle, and I'm the BioSci Careers Assistant Dean. We start with applying for jobs and looking at it as a marketing perspective, which looks a little more like this. So a lot of people make it really complicated, think it's very competitive, think they're always trying to think about how to say exactly what they have to say, what does the employer want to hear exactly. And the problem with this approach is that we don't always know because especially in academic jobs, multiple people are looking at your application. So different departments can get upwards of 300 to 500 applications for each job. And on that, and the people looking at that are committees, right? And on that committee, one person might like this and one person might not like that. So instead of thinking exactly what do I have to say, it's much better to start thinking in terms of what do I bring and how do our interests align. So that's what this model is trying to look at. It looks at starting with knowing yourself. Who are you? What are the three or four things that really stand out about you that are unique? Then what are the three or four things that are really unique about them? And then how do I write to show a fit? Right? Most job postings are not exactly the same. So if you can go through and start with underlining or highlighting some of the top skill sets that they're looking for, both personal as well as the professional, you're going to find a much better opportunity. You're going to be much better at actually writing your cover letter and your resume and tailoring it, or your CV and tailoring it accordingly. To start with, the first part of it, knowing yourself, there are 3 questions, and I believe you should be able to answer all 3 of these questions before you apply. Number 1, why do you want to work here? So what is exciting about the job? What is exciting about the department? What's exciting about the school? Start looking at their mission statement. Start looking at their opportunities, other things that are posted. Start looking at the faculty there, who's publishing what, how are they publishing it. Then start thinking about why you're excited about that. Secondly, why should we hire you? So what do you bring? Why are you exciting? If you were to write a statement, a purpose statement, or a statement of purpose, or a mission statement, would that read? What would that say? And then how well will you fit in here? Now, all 3 of these questions are basically what interview questions are asking. So every interview question is roughly asking one of these 3 things. And the sooner you can answer it, the easier the entire process is going to be. Also, these 3 questions should be answered in some way or another in your cover letter at some point. So start early with answering these questions. Knowing them, start looking at who you know in the department, in the organization. If you can do informational interviews, hopefully you've been doing this at your conferences anyway. You've been networking already. You know who is doing what and how they're doing it. Talk to people who went to school there as well. So even within your network, if you have anybody here on campus who went to, say, UC Irvine, and that's where you're applying, talk to them a little bit about the culture there. Websites and publications, start looking at their publications. I think it's I had an interview one time where I was talking to the faculty and I had actually read their publication. We spent the entire part of my interview talking about their publication. But the fact that I could wax poetic about what they were doing showed this alignment, and it really, they liked me, right? Because I liked them, right? And then it will also give you a sense, too, of where they're publishing, how they're publishing, and what they might be looking for in you. Because they want similarities in the academic departments, but you can't be too similar. So they're looking at how you're going to stand out and complement their work, as opposed to doing the exact same thing or doing something that's too different from what they're doing. And then read the job description closely to get a better sense of what kind of candidate they might be looking for. Understanding academic appointments. Know what your goal is and be intentional about it. By being intentional, what I mean is I go through and I try to use some of the same words that they use in their job description or that's in their mission statement. I know that if I know that I want to be in a research one institution, I'm probably not applying to teaching positions. We had a student one time who he kept getting rejected from some of these teaching jobs. And so I wanted to see his cover letter and I wanted to see his teaching and research statements. His research statement was really, really long and passionate. His teaching statement was about 2 paragraphs. And in his cover letter, he went on and on and on about his research and mentioned in passing how much he liked teaching. So I pushed him and I said, do you really like teaching? Do you want to be at a teaching institution? He said, no, I just need a job. And I said, well, the problem is that's coming across. It's really obvious that you just want a job. And so you're not going to be getting these. So you either need to do a better job of maybe faking it, or you probably need to just stick to the research one institutions that you really like. Right? And sure enough, he applied to a research institution, really beefed that up, and then that's where he is now, and he's thrilled. So research and understand the market, what's out there, who is out there, and how you stand out. Assess how prepared you are. You can do that by showing your CV and cover letter to a lot of different people. Ask your PI to look over it, ask any of your mentors to look over it, ask your friends, and ask people at BioSci Careers as well as Beam to be looking over your documents. They're going to do a few things for you. First of all, they're going to tell you this is completely off from what I've seen. They're going to tell you it doesn't read well. They're going to find the typos that you have missed because you've gone over this so many times that your eyes can no longer see it anymore. And they're going to tell you what their general feel is. When they review it, especially with your friends, ask your friends to go over it in 30 to 60 seconds or less, and then give you first impressions, then go through and do full edits. When I talk about being intentional, I really want you to think about the message that you want to be giving. Right? How do I want to be coming across? I want to be coming across as the expert in X field, or I want to be coming across as somebody who's extremely passionate about teaching. I want to be somebody who is a very good lab manager. So I'm somebody who knows the science but is also going to be able to get really good publications as well as keep the best graduate students. Right? So what is your brand? Then you apply and interview. So it's not just a matter of sending your resume and your cover letter and CV out and then applying. It's really a matter of going through and reflecting first. There is a belief out there that you should apply for every single job that you could possibly be qualified for. That could be upwards of maybe 50 applications. Statistically speaking, you might get some interviews from that. The likelihood, however, of you getting the job of your dreams that way, and also being able to get some sleep throughout the job application process are slim. We recommend going with the jobs that you really care the most about and tailoring those, right? So you've got one approach, which is just randomly applying, and then there's the other, which is being more intentional and applying to the things that you really are confident you want to get, right? And that's more efficient. You're more likely then to put yourself into it and write a better cover letter as opposed to just slapping something together. And you're also more likely to make less errors. Because when you're randomly applying and don't really care, that's when you're likely to say, you know, Stanford's my dream job when applying to Harvard, which will kill your opportunities in the marketplace, right? So what I mean by that is people will sometimes just change a line. Like my dream job is X, and then they'll just insert the organization or the department or the school. And the problem with that is, of course, we're competitors with these other schools, right? So you don't really want to be doing that. Okay? So take the time to really focus. The other thing you can do to maximize your time is to have 3 or 4 different versions of CVs. So if you really do like academia, period, and you could be as happy in, say, a teaching institution as you could be in a research institution, then just have 2 different versions. And those are the ones that you tweak, just little minor tweaks to each time, right? So you're going to tweak, you're going to move this line to here, you're going to move your teaching section here, and that's what you're going to keep in your teaching CV. And that will help you maximize your time as well. In order to create a really strong CV, we want to do the following. First of all, we want to show a fit, we want to use similar terminology, speaking their language. This is why I said I go through all of my job descriptions and I highlight some of the key terms that they use. Then maybe I'll circle the ones that really stand out to me the most. And I want to make sure that especially if those are the ones that apply most to me, those are the ones that I'm going to make sure I put into my CV. Likewise, again, I'm going to use the teaching and research example. I'm going to move my teaching experience section to maybe the top, or at least close to the top of the page in the CV, whereas with my research might go to the bottom, and we're obviously going to switch that up in the research side of things. This goes to organizing your materials appropriately. There is an assumption that the CV that we use is going to be exactly like our NIH BioSketch. Actually, there's a lot of differences between this and the NIH BioSketch. The NIH BioSketch is chronological order, and CVs are reverse chronological order. So we're going with most recent to oldest, whereas BioSketches are different, right? The opposite. We're also describing what we do in a little more formatting. So as opposed to just writing that I was a postdoc in this particular lab, I'm also going to include a little bit about what I do there every day, how I do it, and then if there's anything special. So if I had any mentoring experience, I can either put the mentoring experience into my description of my postdoc, or I can have a mentoring section. Now, if I have a lot of mentoring experience, it behooves me to put that into a mentoring section. Right? If I have very little, then it behooves me to have that in the bullet right on that front page there when I'm describing my research experience. Right? So we want to organize strategically. Tell them and show them what you think they already know. And I'll talk a little more about this, but there are sometimes assumptions we make. Like, I don't need to tell them that I don't need to tell them what I did as a teaching assistant because everybody knows what that is. Well, the fact is that teaching assistants are broad. Sometimes you're just grading papers, and other times you're developing content, and the faculty is not even in the room. And so it behooves you to have some description there, even if you think they already know what you did. Referring to relevant skill sets is also important. This means that your CV doesn't have to be an overview of every single thing that you've done. There are some things that maybe you're tailoring out that are maybe not as relevant. Experiences from undergrad, for example, are maybe not as relevant, right? Some publications that are maybe different than what you're doing could be maybe listed differently, or maybe you don't include them if you have enough to take out, right? And you add that to a relevant skills section or a relevant publication section. Right? And then we're going to rethink the experiences. So sometimes we don't think we have any teaching experience, for example, and then it turns out we actually have more than we think. So I'm going to go through some of these a little more in depth. So when I say tell them what you think they already know, this is an example of one way that I've had students and postdocs do this. So the developmental coursework, this is somebody who maybe is in biochemistry, but was studying something very different. So they would have been applying to maybe psychology departments, environmental sciences departments, as well as biochemistry departments in schools of medicine. So what they did here to show that right up front is they added their developmental coursework, the departmental coursework, to show I've also done some stuff in psychology. Now they could even specialize this out if they're going to be going into applying to a psych department. They could tell me exactly what psych courses they took, right? But that's one way people will show some specialization, and it's one way they'll tailor it, and maybe they'll have a psychology version of their CV, and that will be already tailored for them, so they don't have to go through every time they apply. Then when we look at the dissertation, this person decided to include a dissertation section right under their education to include this. Now, obviously, if they're a PhD student, they're applying to their postdoc. You do use a CV in a postdoc, in your postdoc applications. One big difference between CVs for postdoc jobs as well as versus academic jobs is the skills that you list out. So if you're applying for an academic job, I'm going to assume you know CRISPR, and I kind of don't care that you know CRISPR, right? Because the job at that point, you're probably not going to be in the lab as much as you are running the lab, developing strategy around the lab, publishing, encouraging your graduate students and postdocs to be publishing, and getting money, right? So at that point, I don't need a skills section. I don't need any of that. In your postdoc, when you're applying for a postdoc, you kind of do need that because I need to know what you're going to be doing in my lab, right? So I need to know what you're physically doing. So this person chose to put a dissertation section in there to really hone in again on this kind of nexus of different areas of experience, right? And that's how they chose to do that. Also telling them what you think they already know, including a research interest section is also something that's optional. If you do a research interest section, sometimes this will go at the bottom of your CV or possibly at the top, depending. So one could envision something like your research experience and then after that research interests. And this is what she ended up doing again to highlight the diversity of experience. And it also highlights future. So this is the potential that I could do. So I'm going to be reading your research statement soon, but this is a nice, very basic overview or highlighting and bulleting of the things that I want to be doing, right? Easy read. And your CV should be an easy read, something easy to skim that makes me want to read your research statement, right? Again, this is optional, but it's one way to highlight these things. When I talk about rethinking your experience, this is what I mean. What we tend to do in our teaching experiences is we'll put our title up there and then we'll say, well, this is what I taught. Well, I don't know exactly what you did with that, and I don't necessarily know what introductory economics A and B means at Stanford specifically. Here, though, I'm talking about my ability to teach to 48 undergrads, so a classroom size of 40. Maybe I want to highlight that it's a more intimate setting, so I can put lower numbers. But being able to quantify and really detail out a little more that you've done. What we also get sometimes is people who have done multiple teaching assistantships. What they'll do is they'll detail out, they'll say, teaching experience, Stanford University, and maybe a couple of bullet points about then they maybe will list out their skills, and then the next bullet then is the different classes that they taught at Stanford. So again, trying to think in a more organized framework and fashion. And for more examples, we do have our booklet posted online as well. So you can see we have a booklet of examples. And we're using live examples as well from people who've gotten actual jobs, and then we just anonymized it. So you can look at that online. Rethinking experiences too, another example, teaching related experience. So if I think, oh, I don't have any experience, I don't have any teaching experience, what do I do? Well, I bet that's not true. So I can have a teaching interest section if I want, computational biology, interdisciplinary biosciences. I can look in their course listings and look at what they have and think about some classes that I might like to teach. Or I can also look at this and say, well, I was a laboratory mentor, I mentored, and this is what that looked like. And then one of the things I can do too is I can ask one of my mentors, I can ask them, can I describe me? So I could put that in here, or I can use that as a reference later on. Or in my teaching statement, I can use some of the quotes that my mentee have used for me, right, to talk about a little bit about what my style is. When we think then about constructing the CV, here are a few expectations and common mistakes. First of all, the focus of the CV is academic. That means that you're right under your demographics information, your academic information is always there. This differs from a resume. So after I'm out of the field for about 5 years, if I'm in industry or in, say, academic administration, my academic record goes to the bottom, right, because it's my experience at that point. In an academic CV, your academic credentials are always at the top. There's a question about where do I put my postdoc. You can always put the postdoc under education if you want. That's fine, and then your PhD. But most of the time, what people will do is they'll have a separate section as well for their postdoc underneath that, right? So they'll just list out postdoc, and then they'll describe the postdoc in another fashion. But you can do either or if you want to. Appropriate identifiers, what I mean by this is there are just certain things that you do not put on your CV. That depends on the country. In the United States, you only need your name and your email and phone number. Sometimes you put your address on there, but that's kind of going away. The standard now is name, email, and phone number, right? That's your header. In some countries, they want to know where you were born, they want to know what school you went to, marital status, and they want a photo. That is not something we do in the United States because there are certain questions that are illegal to ask. I cannot ask you about race, ethnicity, those types of things. I can't ask you about marital status. So volunteering that is just not something that we do because of legal factors, right? So just make sure that that's what you've got on there. Your length, font, and detail. For an academic CV, there really is no length cap. And the longer you're in the field, the longer it's going to be. That being said, I'm not a big fan of things that are not relevant. I'm not a fan of padding things. So you don't have to list out every single student that you've met with. I had one of my friends sent me her CV recently, and she had a publication that she'd put into a newsletter in her undergraduate when she was an undergrad. And I said, well, you don't really need that. It was just a newsletter, right? At the time, I'm sure that was great. You know, we were like, you're published. I remember when she got it, she was like, we're published. And I was like, good for you. But now that she's a faculty member, she doesn't need to have it, right? So you know, in time, you can get rid of things that are just not relevant. So that's the general rule is go with what's most relevant. And then if you find something that's older than 10 years that's not as relevant, no longer relevant, that's what you can cut. Font, use your standard serif fonts. So Times New Roman, Calibri, the standards. And font size tends to go from about 10 to 12. Sometimes your header can be 14, but other than that, we really don't go below 10 because there's a lot of older people reading it. And we don't go above 12 because that's getting to be too ridiculous. It's always obvious when you're trying to take up space and make it wider. Keep 1-inch margins. Like I said, in an academic CV, it doesn't really matter. And so be very sensitive to how that's read. In general, we're only using maybe 3 or 4 bullets under each description. Any more seems to be a little ridiculous depending on the job. And a lot of that's going to be spelled out in your publications record anyway. Okay. Most people prefer a bullet point format, but you can use paragraph format as well, as long as it's no more than maybe 4 lines. The order, again, is your academic experience. Then if you do a dissertation section, that would be your dissertation description. Then you have your research. Typically for a research institution, it's going to be your research experience. Then you will have your teaching experience. Then you will have your service. After that comes your presentations and publications. We tend to, and this is a common misunderstanding, but commonly misunderstood, but typically you put your publications at the end, and there's a reason for it. First of all, we want to be able to look at all the experience at front, but secondly, it's actually easier to have it at the end so that when I'm passing it out, I can go to the back and refer to it and copy it much more readily and make and do references and look up the publications much more easily. Or I can just print that out for the search committee before if they want to read that ahead of time. So actually, your publications tend to go to the back. Anything that you add, like if you're a member of AAMC, something like that, those tend to go towards the bottom, right? Those tends to be the last thing that you do. Service includes things like being a member of SBSA, a student or trainee experience, leadership experience, anything that you're doing, say for AWIS outside into the community, that type of thing counts as service. Right? Optional sections, the optional sections are things like any memberships that I'm in, any particular skills. So if you are working with international population. So if you're in epidemiology, it behooves them to know perhaps that you speak Swahili, for example. So that would be an optional section, and skills would be an optional section. We otherwise don't do that in our academic job applications. In a postdoc, we might have a skills section, and that's where we might include things like the CRISPR or C++ programming or something like that. But usually otherwise not relevant. Publication sections, of course, and then some people, if their publication record is particularly long, they'll split it out by different types of journals or first authorship. If it's particularly short, they will sometimes have a publications and presentation section where they include all of that together, right? And posters, that type of thing. Then your recommendations. Recommendations, do not put on the bottom recommendations available upon request. That is a given and wastes space. But most academic applications are asking for at least 3 recommendations anyway. So I usually will use the exact same header that I use for my CV, and I'll just make my recommendations a separate page, unless I have kind of space in the back. If I'm only taking a quarter of this, if my last page is only a quarter of a page, then I'll put my references there. Otherwise, take it there. My recommendations, I always am including the relationship I have to, so I'll put the name and then I'll put parenthetically or underneath what my relationship is. If they ask for 3 references, I always give 4 in case my references are out of town or there's something wrong, right? So I always give extra. Common mistakes, like I said, applying randomly. Well, this just looks good and not really paying attention. Not proofreading or having so many iterations that by now you're not seeing the mistakes. Too much detail or too little detail in illogical formatting and highlighting. One of my biggest pet peeves is random highlighting or random bolding or bulleting. So you'll have somebody who describes something, they'll have, this is where I work at Stanford University, bullet, this is my project, and then like unfilled bullet or dash. Well, and actually that makes the reader, it's more confusing, and you're doing it because you want to organize it. It's actually harder for the reader to do that, right? If there's something important, instead of bolding the middle of the sentence, make that your first word, or make that line your first line. Because obviously, if it's important enough to bold, then it's important enough to be your first or second line. And that is how people read CVs. They'll usually read where you are in your title, then they'll read the first couple of bullets and decide if they want to go further. Cover letters then, again, or letters of application, they're called a lot of different things. Personal statements. Personal statements are a little different. Personal statements are more of kind of your statement of purpose of who I am, where I want to be, how this job is going to get me to where I want to be. More common in the sciences is a letter of application. Either way, the expectation and the purpose is multifold. Number one, it is a sense of your communication style. How do you communicate? How do you write? Number two, it gives me a sense of how you fit into the job. How do you see this job? What is your understanding of the job? What is your understanding of fit? And finally, it's an opportunity to tell people things that may not have been clear in your CV, right? If there's something there that's maybe not obvious, or you have had another experience that's maybe at the bottom of the CV that you want to bring up and bring forward, this is your opportunity to tell the story of that. Also tells the story of sometimes people, when you're applying from Stanford, I know I had a friend who was applying one time into a college that was in the middle of Pennsylvania. And the first question she got was, why would you want to come here? Well, as it happens, her entire family is in the middle of Pennsylvania. So in your cover letter, in your last line, could be something like, your quality of research or your focus on X, Y, and Z, in addition to proximity to my family, compels me to apply for this job. So this cover letter can be far more personal. It personalizes the CV as well. It is a myth that nobody reads these. In industry, I think about half and half. Half read, half don't. And those are odds I don't want to take, so I submit one even if it's optional. In academia, most people read them because they want to get to know you as a person, because tenure track jobs especially are sometimes last longer than marriages, right? So we're looking for fit here. And so they probably will take the time to read it, at least for their top 50 candidates, right? All right, and I should say, I went back here. This provided a presentable document. Make sure it's standard format usually, and I'm going to talk about this next, but usually it's about 1 page, right? A statement of purpose, or one where they're asking you to provide in one document a description of your research, teaching, and interests. Well, that's usually about 3 pages, because it basically is your statement of purpose plus your research statement plus your teaching statement in all one packet. But in general, your cover letter is about 1 page, right? Single-spaced. The format, you have your address and date, or you have a header that matches the CV plus the date, and your email. A salutation, Dear Hiring Committee is standard, or Dear Dean Minor and Hiring Committee, whoever is chairing, if you happen to know who's chairing this. Dear Sir or Madam is quite outdated. To whom it may concern is quite generic. Then 2 to 3 paragraphs of information, maybe a fourth one that ties everything together, and then your closure. The closure is putting everything together in one fell swoop. It's kind of summarizing what I just said, right? And then sincerely, your name and then your title at the bottom, and possibly your email at the bottom if you don't have it at the top. Common mistakes, a big one is the thesis statement or lack thereof. The thesis statement, if we can go back to, say, 5th grade, is this summary statement that tells them what they're going to read. In our case, and for our purposes, it is your statement of purpose. This is who I am, and this is what I'm about, and this is why there's a fit. So if we go back to those 3 questions I said in the beginning, why do you want to work here? Why should we hire you? How are you going to fit in? A beautiful thesis statement might address those 3 things, right? I bring to the position X, Y, and Z skill sets, which I know will fit in with your X, Y, and Z focus. And I'm compelled to work in an institution that believes in A, B, and C, right? So that's your thesis statement. That's your first statement. If you struggle with writing cover letters, just sit down and try to write that statement. This is who I am. This is what you bring, and this is why we will work well together. Once you do that, you've got your cover letter pretty much outlined, right? Because then your next paragraph is, let me tell you about my skills. Then the next paragraph is, because of these skills, you and I will do really well together. And then your bow is, this is what brings me here. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Right? Again, we have samples of these in the booklet that's also online and in our office. Let your work speak for itself is a big mistake. There's this assumption that, well, I've got a Nature paper, obviously I'm going to get a job. You're not the only person getting Nature papers. It doesn't mean that I know what that was about. It doesn't mean that I know what you've been doing, the breadth of your experience. So you do actually need to tell me a little more about how you approached that paper and what you did with it, and where you think that's going to take you. The trick with academic jobs is that they are future focused, right? So you are going to be going into, you're trying to tell them how you're going to get tenure, that you have the potential to get tenure. And just having a Nature paper doesn't mean you will get tenure. It's possible. Doesn't mean it, right? Big mistakes are transitions. So we'll see a paragraph that just says, this is who I am, and then it skips to something completely foreign, right? So you want to make sure that it's a good writing sample. It's not your resume and CV in prose. It's a writing sample. It's trying to outline your story. Oddly enough, just being self-focused is not effective. I see down here, you can see too, I have I will, or we. We don't want too much of that either. I sometimes will sit down when I am looking over somebody's cover letter, and the first thing I do is I circle in pen all of the I will. But it is about you. It's also about fit. So how will we work together? So that is why we do want to give credence to the value that they bring, or looking at why you're applying in the first place. Again, cutting and pasting from the CVs. I have a pretty good memory. So if I've read your CV first, which is probably what I'm going to do, because they usually start with a CV, because I don't want to read your cover letter and your statements if I'm not excited about your CV, right? So I will remember that line from your CV if I read it again in your cover letter. If you've just cut and pasted, I'll remember it. And maybe I don't care, but maybe I do, because it's not telling me more information, right? And the more information you can convey, the better off you are, because people respond to the personal. Length, again, I talked about one page. In the social sciences, I can get away with more than one page in the social sciences. And I can get away with more than one page because I've been in my field for over 20 years. When you're first starting out, probably not. Right? And remember, they are looking through a lot of applications. So. And oops, I didn't mean to say that here. Did you really mean to say, I believe my research and teaching experiences made me well qualified for an academic position at XY University at this time, right? Pretty bland, right? It's a pretty basic statement. And I've got some better examples here coming up next. Did you really mean to say, although I have never taught before, right? I don't know that I want to point out right away what my weaknesses are. I don't know that I want to say that. And besides, like I said, we're rethinking experience. I bet you do have some teaching experience that's relevant. Did you really mean to say, I think I could contribute to your department by, or I think I could? I don't know if I want to show that doubt. I think I want to be a little more confident. Did you really mean to say, I'm interested in Stanford because it's one of the top universities in the country for my field? Okay, well, sure. Most people know that, though, and does that mean you are one of the top researchers in the country in your field? Maybe what you meant to say is, my graduate research on A and experiences teaching both B and C courses coincide well with the academic offerings at XY University. It is this fit that compels me to apply. Maybe you meant to say that instead. Maybe you meant to say, I've developed my teaching skills via taking on valuable mentoring experiences, and I look forward to bringing that to you. Or applying that in the classroom, whatever. Maybe you meant to say, student feedback has consistently shown me to be one, which I find particularly helpful in too. And finally, maybe you meant to say, I'm interested in Stanford because of its reputation for innovation and faculty support. Maybe, just maybe, that's what you meant to say. From here, my recommendation for you, whether after you leave here or if you're at home, is to sit down and start doing this, to write out what really are my top qualifications. You don't have to do this alone. Ask your friends, ask your PI, what makes me unique? Ask your PI of all the people you've worked with, of all the students and postdocs you've worked with, what makes me really unique? Ask your peers this. When you're going to conferences, when somebody comes up to you and says, well, that's a brilliant talk, say, really, what did you like? Because we have this desire to just take a compliment and be like, yeah, I'm awesome. But wait a minute, why am I awesome? Maybe that was a great presentation because it was so boring, yet short, I was glad it was over in time. That's not the brand you want. You want a brand that says, you are the one in the world who can explain X better than anybody else because you're so detailed or whatever. That's what I'm going to try to put out. Then think about, why are you interested? It may be that you're not interested. After you do this exercise, you think, well, I want money. I want a job. So do you really want to apply then? And if so, you're really going to have to work to find some themes that can really find that alignment. I worry about how happy you're going to be. I worry about how successful you're going to be on the job market and in that department, if that's your only reason for applying. But do some due diligence and see. And then finally, what do your materials show then? So what are the themes that need to be in your materials to really shine? What examples, what in your statements and your cover letters need to be highlighted? What words need to be in there? What sections have to be there? That type of thing. So consider the following then. When you are looking over your materials and when you're having your friends look over them, ask them to look over your materials in a very brief period of time, only about 30 to 60 seconds, and then say, my first impression is X. This is what stood out. And then align that. Is that how I want to market myself, right? And I can tell you, after looking at, boy, hundreds, maybe thousands of CVs over the last 20 years, I can tell right away, CVs and cover letters, especially cover letters, I can tell right away that you're applying for a job and not this one. Of course, that's my job to know that. But it's important to know. Next, is it easy to read and follow? Were you able to get through this quickly, right? And then finally, are there any grammatical or spelling errors? Because again, it's so easy to miss that. We especially want to make sure that we're aligning so that if I'm applying to Harvard, I'm using Harvard's name and not Northeastern or Stanford and so on. I'm not making these mistakes. All right, so you can find our information right here on our website. You also can find all of our videos here, and this is also under the resources section also where you're going to find the samples book that I talked about. And that is tailored specifically by field. So if you're in engineering or bioengineering, you're going to find bioengineering samples. If you're in the social sciences, you'll find that, and then likewise with the sciences. So, all right, thank you very much.